We have come to this late as a community, but we can draw lessons from other fields. And I'm going to touch on this just very briefly. And it's important, I think, to do so because we are new enough at this as a community that we don't have a lot of the rigorous data and assessments that we might want to make the case for why some of our innovations should be adopted by policymakers and by funders. Other fields have done a good job in moving towards populating professional legal deserts by documenting the shortages, by developing institutional solutions. And by that, I mean across educational institutions, across government institutions at all levels, local, state, and national. And then measuring the success. They've done a great job being able to report back to policymakers and funders. Here are the results of the institutional solutions we've put into place, and we can show you the documented improvement in these areas. Key things we've learned about in documenting provider shortages, it's about the needs of the population as well as the locations of providers. Many of you will have seen the maps that we make at the Deason Center about rural legal deserts and where the lawyers are located. The next step in that process, our research team is working on this now, is in laying those maps out next to the population needs, or in this case, caseload sizes, to understand what the relationship is between the need for defender services and the availability of defense providers. Creating long-term strategies, I mentioned this. In other fields, it has been educational pipelines and financial incentives, which is a fancy way of saying loan forgiveness and scholarships. And lastly, the measuring program outcomes. What they've done is engaged in longitudinal studies of the programs. How have they worked? And then they've been terrific about communicating the results to policymakers, publishing reports, documenting strategies. That's something we as a community, again, are going to have to do more of. So I'm going to jump into the three solutions that we propose. And again, because we have a very engaged, very experienced community on this webinar, as I go through each solution, at the end of my overview, I'm going to stop so we can have a few minutes of conversation. The three solutions we've got are creating pipelines, reducing barriers to practice, and building practice structures. So let's start with pipelines. And I want to highlight here, these are not pipelines to practice. These are not pipelines to law school. These are pipelines from high school to college and college to law school, and then law school to practice. Why? Well, because again, thanks to mostly medical research, we understand that rural students who want to stay rural may be reluctant to move far from home for school. And that can feel maybe like not a huge barrier, but then you have to identify where are our law schools? If we apply this model to the law school experience, we don't have a lot of rurally located law schools. We've got to think about rural colleges. A rural upbringing is the strongest predictor of rural medical practice. What does that mean? It means that in addition to thinking about pipelines from the large mass of folks who end up at law school or who might go to law school, we have to be thinking about homegrown solutions. How do we encourage rural kids to become rural college graduates, rural law school graduates, and ultimately rural practitioners? And when I use that term here, I don't mean the college is rural or the law school is rural, but I mean these are people who identify as rural. And lastly, the rural educational experience is also strongly correlated with a rural medical practice, a residency, a semester in practice at a particular school, a fellowship in the community, in any rural community, strongly associated with rural medical practice. And those are lessons we can and should take to heart as we think about pipelines. So let's talk for a moment about rural secondary students. And I know this feels very daunting for folks who are already handling too much, but I think we have to deal with the reality that this is a long pipeline. And rural secondary students, when we compare them to their urban and suburban peers, they're equally likely to graduate from high school, but they are less likely to attend college. They have limited access to college counseling. They have less interaction with college recruiters, many of whom don't bother ever going to rural communities. And often they have fewer connections to college graduates who can either model or encourage or coach them through the process of applying to college. Pipeline programs, so therefore they start in high school, they run to college, over to law school, and they end when they're finally in practice. So pipelines to get folks to college and graduate school. Successful pipelines, and I'm generalizing here, I'll talk in a minute about some specific examples, but successful pipeline programs offer readiness coaching. What I mean here is academic coaching about what the expectations may be on a college campus. It may involve readiness coaching about life outside of a home community. It may involve readiness coaching about being in a much larger social environment than some kids are used to. It involves application support, and this covers everything from campus visits to fee waivers or fee scholarships where you're giving kids money so they can afford to apply to college. It means coaching them through the application process, making good choices about which schools to apply to, completing their applications in a way that makes them competitive, and understanding how to identify and select the right schools for them. Students who are in college benefit when their pipeline programs include rural tracks, mentors, and rural cohorts. A rural track, and I'm going to talk about a couple of these in a minute, may involve an actual formal program that brings in students who have expressed an interest in rural legal practice. Rural mentorship may simply be a regular process of connecting rural students who've come through this pipeline with a rural practice mentor. And rural cohorts, just giving these rural kids somebody else to talk to who shares their ambition, who understands why they want to make their life's work in a rural community. Funded experiential learning. Now, some of y'all are saying, oh, that's a law school thing. It is a college opportunity. Many successful pipeline programs offer experiential opportunities at the college and the law school level. That can be an externship, it can be a law clinic, it can be an internship. Critically, they need to be funded if we are talking about extern and internships. Those are programs where students leave the college environment and they go someplace else, or they leave the law school campus and they go someplace else. Asking a student to pay tuition for an externship and then find housing in a remote community, travel there, they may need assistance purchasing the right professional clothing. All of that costs money. And we have seen over and over again students who want to take advantage of rural opportunities and can't afford to get there. Accelerated graduation timelines. This is a pipeline strategy for almost anything you want. A 3-3 program where students have 3 years of undergraduate and 3 years of law school. Very, very attractive for reasons that we're going to talk about. And finally, postgraduate rural placements, giving students an opportunity to graduate and practice being in a rural area without committing long term. So in other words, rather than asking someone to commit for 3 years to be a public defender, ask them to do a 1-year fellowship, create an incubator that allows them some support for going out and trying this kind of practice. Those are strategies to get students to become lawyers who become rural practitioners. Pipelining non-rural students, by which I mean students who have not had a lived experience in a rural community, requires something more. We have to combat all kinds of rural stereotypes. The idea that all rural communities are white, conservative, and insular. The number of students who simply have not thought about the growing Hispanic population, particularly in the rural Southwest, about the Black Belt. It's often surprising, but it's consistent with rural stereotypes. We have to break those down. We have to combat the idea that all rural places are sleepy towns that have nothing to do at all. Colorado did a great job with this when it was doing its summer recruiting program for rural, to encourage people to try rural practice. Who wouldn't want a rural summer in Colorado, rafting and hiking? But if you just say rural, people may not think that way. We got to combat the idea that these are bad places to practice law. And that mythology is persistent from everything, and I'm dating myself here, from the TV shows with your old boss hog, right? This idea that everything in rural practice is corrupt, this idea that no one knows what they're doing. We have to hold up examples of excellence in rural practice and explain why rural places are excellent opportunities to practice law, including the fact that you'll have real opportunities at advancement. People who want to practice public defense and find themselves in a class of 50 lawyers or 30 lawyers or even 10 lawyers, they don't expect to have real responsibility for serious cases, particularly early, because there are rigorous training programs. And also, they are, to some extent, they are somewhat replaceable. Rural public defenders have an opportunity to really be integral parts of their community and their court system. Each one has relationships with people in the system, with their clients, and as a result, their opportunities to advance in their career, whether it's within public defense practice or after leaving public defense practice, going on to serve in the community, to become a judge, those opportunities are much richer in a smaller community. What else do we need to show them? We need to show them that you can be a lawyer hero in a rural area. And what I mean here is we have to get serious about redefining public interest work as rural work and rural work as public interest work. Our public interest narratives in public defense tend to revolve around major urban areas. We have to restore the idea that serving in a rural community is public service in the most classic form. It is civil rights work in its most classic form. We have to remind students that rural communities can be more affordable than living in an urban area, that they are diverse communities, racially, ethnically, socioeconomically, in all kinds of other ways. And lastly, that you can do interesting, creative, innovative things in a rural community, often much more easily than you can in an urban area. Why? Because everybody knows everybody else, there's less red tape. And in fact, a lot of the examples I'm going to talk about later on are innovations that happened in a shockingly small amount of time, precisely because they were done in an area where there was less bureaucracy, less red tape, and everybody knew each other. So what are some established pipeline models? I want to give you some examples. The University of Nebraska's Rural Law Opportunities Program. This is based on a medical model that they have in Nebraska. It includes college recruiting initiatives, all the things I talked about earlier, getting students onto campus, giving them interviews, coaching them through the process. During their college experience, between their junior and senior year, students are offered rural externships. They're given scholarships to go to state colleges. So these are high school students, remember, being recruited to college first. And then once they're in college, free prep for the LSAT and automatic admission to the University of Nebraska Law School. And I should flag here, there are some minimum grade and LSAT scores that are required, but it's a direct path. And this is a 7-year educational pipeline that starts 1 year before that or 2 years before that. This is a 9-year commitment by whoever's organizing it and doing this work. But that kind of long-term commitment yields results. Other pipeline strategies, personalized recruitment, public interest. We just talked about all of these. Washburn University has a whole menu of programs. The Kansas Rural Practice Initiative, and I don't know if Sean's on this. I hope he is. If so, he can jump in and help me if I've missed anything. But this connects Kansas pre-law students from Kansas State University to the Washburn faculty for mentoring and experiential learning opportunities. The Law School Early Admissions Program, otherwise known as LEAP, It's a 3-3 program. Students are allowed to complete college in 3 years and have their first year of law school coursework count toward that last year, what would have been a last year of college. So students are saving a year of undergraduate tuition. And there's also scholarships during their second and third year. Rural externship programs. They've got a they've got a nonprofit foundation that's providing up to 6 hours of credit, meaning the tuition that goes into the externship credit is covered. And in addition, there's a $5,000 stipend to cover travel and housing costs. And lastly, there's the Third Year Anywhere program. And this allows law students to complete their third year of law school in the area where they want to practice, which includes rural areas. They get to split their credit hours between a part-time externship and online coursework. It gives them that taste of rural life and practice without forcing them to an early commitment about whether they want to pursue it. Classes, even just giving students exposure through law school courses can be valuable. And I just wanted to list a few of the courses that we know are out there. UC Davis, and these are law school courses, Law and Rural Livelihoods. Michigan, Law in Rural America. Maine has a rural practice clinic that again is offsite. Students are housed offsite during that clinic. And Texas Tech, which has this very interesting blended model where you have a regional public defender office that is essentially built into the Texas Tech Law Clinic. All of these are opportunities to direct students toward a rural practice, give them some exposure, make it feel less daunting, more familiar, more exciting. We have a publication, this is now dated, I think it's probably from 2020 or 2021, but you'll find a lot of these programs and others in this publication. Again, it's not updated, so there are a lot of wonderful programs that have come along since that aren't in there, but I'd encourage you to take a look if you want to run some of these down. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking for a second and invite y'all to jump in so we can talk about pipelines. And I know you people, so I will call on people if it's quiet.
Are we supposed to type or just talk?
You can talk. You can just jump right. This is like a public defender crowd. Y'all aren't shy. Jump right
Okay.
in.
Well, this is not a very shy question, I have to admit. And maybe this is me forecasting too far into the future, but we have had this happen before where we've invested a lot in a student for a rural area, and then that student, once they graduate, just takes a job at the prosecutor's office in the rural area because they can pay twice as much, which feels kind of like a slap in the face, frankly.
Yeah, that's vicious. And I don't have a perfect answer other than to say more money. I will say there are ways to lock students in depending on what you're doing. Tell me a little bit about what you're investing in the students.
So they were actually doing a program out of one of these schools that got them set up with our office. So our office worked with a law school, which was great. It's a great program the law school has. And it was some sort of a paid externship stipend situation. And so we had them for a summer. I think we even had them perhaps even during semesters as well. But then at the end of the day, we cannot compete with the salary of the prosecutor's office. So they got to know the community and found out they liked it and they liked practicing there and they liked doing rural work, but not necessarily sold on public defense enough to stay.
I get that. I don't have an all-purpose solution. I know that the more your program ties the benefits to completion at a certain location or certain type of practice, the better off you are. But you are 100% right that some portion of this requires us to focus back on these questions, these fundamental questions of salary. I wouldn't complain, by the way, while we're talking, if y'all turned your cameras on, so I'm not the only one out here. Anybody else have any suggestions? Because I don't have a panacea on this one. But if folks have other ideas, I'd love to hear them.
So my name is Jimbo Perry. I'm from North Carolina, and I'm small town lawyer for a lot of years, and now involved with the Chief Justice Commission on Professionalism. And this is a primary topic that we're trying to address in North Carolina. And what the model that I've heard talked about it's a model that Truett Cathy used with Chick-fil-A when he most of his original owner operators were in his Sunday school class. You know, he taught a fourth grade Sunday school class. And my own personal experience here in our little town has been, we start in effect recruiting really in elementary school in terms of just sharing the idea about the need for people that want to live here. It's a great job, a great way to make a living, and a great lifestyle. So I love the idea of long-term recruitment, but I think it's even okay to talk about it even longer term. Maybe not with programs, but with relationships, it being relationship driven with young people. I know one of our district court judges is a young man that I started working with, when he was in middle school. So anyway, I think long term is good.
That's super helpful. And let me also flag, we've talked to a number of lawyers who are simply taking their office in for a week or even less to do a mock trial day or bring kids into court, let them watch something, not something too scary, but something age appropriate, and giving them opportunities to see themselves in a courtroom and see people who came from similar backgrounds in a courtroom can also be immensely powerful. What else do people want to talk about when we talk about pipelines?
Hi, Pamela. My name's Cass.
Go ahead.
I'm like Cassidy, and then I didn't see who else went, but I'll start with Cassidy and then go to the next person. Maybe I shouldn't have said be as aggressive as you are in practice. Put your hands up. Use that little button for raising hands.
I like it. Thank you, Pamela. I was just going to share, I'm in Michigan. I'm the director of the Michigan Holistic Defense Fellowship, which is a pretty new program on the block. 10 weeks during summer for law students and social work students. It's a paid placement opportunity at a public defender office where they will receive full-time mentorship, supervision, and the opportunity to practice being a public defender or being a mitigation social worker under people who have been pioneers in this field. So we started with 5 sites. We are up to 6, and half of our sites are in rural Michigan, half are in urban settings. So we certainly attract students who want to be in urban areas. But we have a lot of applicants who either want to go back to their roots in rural Michigan or who like recreating. They like the small town life opportunities that the North offers. So I'm located in Marquette on the shore of Lake Superior. Nearest law school is 6-7 hour drive away. So the law students we get up here have to want to be up here, but they exist. It's just a matter of connecting them with paid opportunities and frankly, helping them find temporary housing.
Cassidy, have you been at this long enough to know roughly what your rate of return is? How many of them are coming back to public defense, or is it too early?
So the program has only been around for 2 years. 2026 will be our 3rd year. And that first year cohort was exclusively 1Ls going into their 2nd year. So we have not actually seen any fellows who have graduated law school yet and taken the bar. But we are planning on that long-term data collection because we want to know where they go.
All right. Well, Alexa Jane says she's got one of yours. So thank you for that, Cassidy. I appreciate it. And I think it was Brett who had his hand up next. Yeah. Blake, sorry. Blake.
Yeah, this is the group from Mojave County, Arizona. I'm Ron Gilly. I'm the legal defender. One of the problems we've had is some of the law schools will not allow externships to be paid.
Yeah.
We have funds available to pay them, but they can't come out here and get paid. Therefore, they don't come because they can't afford to come out here. The other problem we have, which I think is probably a United States issue, cost of living in Mojave County used to be very affordable years ago. Our housing prices, and we have rental problems. We don't really have a lot of rentals here, and the cost of rent and living here is not as good as it used to be. So the combination of not having enough places for people to rent, and some law schools, I don't know if all of them, but the ones that we've done recruiting trips at, I'm a University of Oklahoma graduate, so I made a trip to Oklahoma a couple years ago and didn't know until I got out there that they can't get paid for their externship. And so even though I had a very successful trip talking to a lot of students, I couldn't get anybody in the pipeline because they can't afford to come out here and then have no money to get
Right.
to work a summer with us.
So every law school is going to be different, but there is more than one way to skin a cat. A couple of suggestions that I want to offer you. One, you could offer it as a scholarship, as a rural externship scholarship, and put the money toward helping them pay their tuition. And because they do pay tuition for their externship programs. So one way is make it a special scholarship for that particular externship program. And that may allow you to direct your money there. Now, it's a different way of giving students money. It's going to go, it'll be a part, essentially, they'll have to work it through their financial aid office. You'll give it as a scholarship. There may be some repercussions in terms of how much financial aid they're getting. So you'll have to think it through. It's also possible that if you characterized it as a living stipend, a cost of living stipend, that might be helpful. Other things that we have explored, if you can find the housing, and I recognize housing is challenging, and I think we've all had that wonderful, helpful judge who says, oh, they can live with me, and you're like, well-intentioned, but a terrible idea. So I recognize that housing is a challenge, but again, you could have a housing scholarship that if you had the housing location where you are paying for the housing, which takes that cost off of their plates. So those are a couple of ideas. I do want to move us on to the two other strategies that we have. We're going to leave some time at the back end for any other comments, but I want to thank you all for that input. And obviously, if you have programs that you want folks to look at, please do drop those links into the chat. Now you're going to see my technical skill or lack thereof as I attempt to relocate my PowerPoint and take us back there. So here we go. Well, all right. If we got it?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Reducing barriers to practice. We really have two strategies here. Improving the financial support for people who are in these positions and facilitating bar admission. And here I'm really talking not just about the financial and emotional costs of taking the bar exam, but I'm talking about cross-jurisdictional practices and also pre-admission practice. So everybody knows it, but I think it behooves us to at least say it. The debt that these kids face is staggering. More than 71% of law graduates borrow on average $120,000 a year, and we know rural students borrow more. In addition, we got to reckon with the fact that we have really outrageous pay disparities. So I'm going to show you some slides addressing this that are from Kansas. It's not that Kansas has a better or a worse problem than anyone else. It's that we've done a lot of work with Kansas, so we know a lot about it, and I want to share. You can see here the sort of outrageous discrepancies, and this goes back to what, was it Alexa Jane who was saying that, you raise them up and then they go to a prosecutor office because there's more salary. Here's why. The other thing we got to recognize is that turnover costs money too. And in terms of communicating with your legislators and your policymakers about salary parity, Kansas was able to quantify the cost of public defense turnover. Now you'll notice that the cost decreased, and I'm going to explain why. But there are ways to compute the cost of underfunding public defense that go beyond things like jail beds and wait lists. There are costs associated with recruitment and training, et cetera. How did they fix it? They raised public defender salaries. I know, easier said than done. But there's no guarantee that that would happen. And again, remember, Kansas is a profoundly rural place. I don't want you guys to think that this shows the rate of decline, by the way. These are static points, FY 2022, FY 23. July of 22, there are public defender raises, and you can see the decrease. 2022, you had a 20% turnover rate, dropped down to 8.6. And retention, let's face it, is the flip side of the recruitment problem. If you can hold on to the folks you got, you need fewer new folks. Here's a link to our Kansas policy paper. You'll see a lot more information there if you'd like to look at it. It's got some examples of the mapping work we do to map attorney scarcity and try and understand emerging scarcity areas, to try to help legislators and others imagine what scarcity will do as lawyers start to retire. And so the QR code there is for you if you want it. Again, as I mentioned earlier, rural students are more likely to need financial aid. They have more educational debt. And that's true even at rural community colleges compared with urban community colleges. Lower family incomes are one reason. Often there's inexperience with the financial aid system. Many rural college students are first-gen students. Same is true with rural law school students. And so inexperience with financial aid systems. And then there are costs associated with educational migration. This is very similar to what we were just talking about with the challenges in Arizona of getting students housing. If you are moving from a rural area to a different place, you may have to not only spend the money on moving and transportation and finding someplace else to be, it costs a lot to go home for the holidays, and you may have family responsibilities that your family now is going to have to shoulder the burden of paying someone to handle them. So there are a lot of hidden costs as well for rural students who are being forced to go to urban areas for their education. When we think about how we expand scholarship and loan repayment opportunities, there are a number of strategies, but I want to emphasize first, and I think we're all doing it, we got to limit our reliance on federal programs and instead look to national models in other fields. We're all following the conversations about loan forgiveness. Interestingly, we don't see any attacks coming after, for example, the National Health Service Corporation, which since the 1970s has been running very, very successful scholarship programs that place doctors and other medical providers in shortage areas for extended period of time. We should be looking to state models in other fields. It can be a very effective strategy to say to your home state, look, you know this works in X field, let's apply it to the legal field. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. And then enlist unlikely allies. There are folks who may be supportive of your goals here who you might not have thought of. This is just a little example of a state success. Again, I'm using Kansas because it's a place where we've done a lot of work. They have a veterinary training program, and 94% of them, they have a 4-year obligation to practice in a rural area when they're done with the program. 94% of them are still practicing in a rural area after the 4-year obligation ends. 77% of them are in the same practice they started in. These programs work. Key program elements that we would advise for a rural public defense recruitment program: benefits for full-time public defenders, benefits for private appointed counsel. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute because I'm sure some of y'all are a little concerned. Those are proportional benefits, and we'll talk about it. And in exchange for those benefits, you get programmatic oversight, particularly when we are talking about either county-based systems with state repayment programs or private appointed counsel. You can impose requirements that come along with scholarship and loan repayment. Training and mentoring can be a requirement, caseload reporting can be a requirement, and workload limitations can be a requirement. So these programs actually offer an opportunity to do two things: to help recruit and to improve the quality of practice on the ground. Other financial incentives we might think about: reduced rate home loans or down payment assistance. Many of y'all have in your home state something called Homes for Heroes, which is home loan and down payment assistance for first responders. Public defenders are certainly first responders in my book. Insurance support, particularly for medical and malpractice insurance. Again, here I'm speaking often, but not exclusively, to your appointed counsel who have no health insurance. And I am painfully aware that there are still some public defenders full-time who have limited access to insurance and retirement benefits. But these folks in particular, if you can get them included, for example, in your medical program for discounts in exchange for a certain number or a certain number of hours in rural practice, it'll go a long way toward recruitment. And when you extend those incentives to assigned counsel, it should be percentage-based eligibility. If 50% of your practice is in rural indigent defense, then maybe you can get 50% of the loan forgiveness benefits. Other benefits you might extend to them that we take for granted in a full-time public defender office would be CLE for free, and maybe some other kind of benefits like access to certain experts who have done seminars, or maybe copies of impeachment transcripts on officers that they're used to cross-examining. There are all kinds of ways that you can extend benefits to these private assigned counsel once they are in your program. So established models. The leader, hands down, of course, is the South Dakota Rural Attorney Recruitment Program. They require 5 continuous years of rural practice from the participants. The annual incentive payments over 5 years total $62,000, not $62,000 a year. They total $62,000. That number is basically 90% of the cost of a first-year tuition at the University of South Dakota Law School. And they define rural pretty narrowly: county of 10,000 or less, or a municipality of 35,000 or less. Using unlikely allies in Texas. I want to give this as an example because we have been working on it and it's yielding some results, albeit slowly. Texas has and has never funded a rural prosecutors program. Yes, there's a program exclusively for prosecutors. You're shocked. And you can see here that it's an annual repayment plan, 5 years of public service in a DA's office required, or a municipal prosecutor's office required. And you can see how the payment schedules go. The payments come in over the first 3 years, and then there are 2 years where the lawyer continues their own payments. So it's a total of $27,000 of state repayment. The lawyer picks up $29,000 of that. Meanwhile, Texas also has the lovely Texas Physicians Educational Loan Repayment Program, easily the worst acronym that I've seen in a long time, PLRP. But this is a program that Texas has and has funded. So we started with the fact that they have an unfunded prosecutors program. We looked then and said, what are they doing for rural communities? And this is actually for underserved communities broadly. And you can see again, it's a 4-year loan repayment program. So what did we do? We looked at the model. We realized that it was really easily outperforming what you see in the federal model. But more importantly, they were averaging 96 new participants a year. And in their first 3 cohorts, more than 70% of them were still practicing in shortage areas at least 4 years later. And in one cohort, more than 50% were still in the shortage area 8 years after enrollment. So what did we do? We made a new legislative proposal that drew in an unlikely ally: prosecuting attorneys, full-time public defenders, again, and appointed counsel with a prescribed minimum rural caseload. We proposed repayment over 4 years, essentially the same repayment model that was already in use. We had the bill filed twice now, in 2023 and 2025. No, that's not a win, but it ain't a loss yet either. And we would not have gotten as far had we not used a model in existence and then brought in prosecutors who had just as strong an interest. They are struggling, not as much, I think, as defenders are, but there are shortages. And we've gotten farther because it speaks to both sets of concerns. I'm giving you a link here to our larger Texas policy paper because you can see here what it looks like, not just for that proposal, but for some of the other kinds of examples we've given legislators on a state-specific basis, focused exclusively on how to address rural legal deserts. So I'm going to switch real quickly to bar membership, and then I want to give us time for discussion. Bar exam, I don't really need to say more except that it's awful and nobody wants to do it once, let alone 2 or 3 times. Direct admission costs are astronomical these days. I'm just going to list them here. Y'all can see them. That's just to get in the door. It doesn't count your annual dues or your CLE fees. So lowering the cost of admission is one strategy. Offering limited licenses for folks while they're waiting for their bar results so they can earn some money after expending all that cash. Maybe considering diploma privileges, limited licenses for public defenders. Couple of examples. Kentucky has a Supreme Court rule that's limited admission for public defenders, At 18-month intervals, it's renewed and it comes with supervision requirements. Oregon has 2 new pathways that were sort of COVID inventions, an experiential portfolio pathway. These are big mouthfuls, and a supervised practice portfolio exam. One of the benefits of these kinds of programs is often they involve apprenticeships where the employer is actually paying the lawyer or the incoming lawyer rather than them having to pay for the privilege of going to school. And Arizona has a new lawyer apprentice program. Additionally, I want to highlight reciprocal admission costs. They are extremely high. Again, if you are, think about, for example, North Dakota, where a very high percentage of its lawyers are actually residing in Minnesota. They might have more lawyers coming over from Minnesota to practice in North Dakota than other states do as well, because it's cheaper to waive in there than elsewhere. 3 rural states are charging $2,000 to waive in. That's not a great way to get lawyers who have public defender experience to come help you with your shortages. So strategies, pro hoc vice rules, and no fee admission for folks who are going to practice public defense. So once again, I'm going to stop for us to have some conversation. How are folks feeling about the financial incentives, thoughts about those financial incentives, bar admissions, et cetera? Anybody? Is anybody working with one of these programs right now or have lawyers in your office who are the beneficiaries of one of these programs?
I've
Why
had,
not?
yeah.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead. Go
sorry,
ahead.
it says Jimbo Pier again. I mean, I had one who we are not the beneficiary of it. We're on the losing side of it, where somebody missed passing in North Carolina by 2 points, and
Oh,
they went to South Carolina and are fortunately they've gone to work with a public defender down there in South Carolina. So I'm very happy that he's plugged in there, but we desperately needed him here.
well, so this goes back to the point I was making earlier about the limited licensure practice, for example, in Kentucky. It would help if we had strategies that would allow public defender candidates to keep practicing, not only before they've been admitted, but sometimes while they're taking a second exam, as long as they're supervised. Liz, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm from Washington State, and we have another rule, APR 8 is
Yeah.
what ours is, to allow public defenders to come in before they practice and practice for a little while without any kind of bar admission. And then we also, they're expanding our pathways to practice for a non-bar exam pathway to licensure. And that's still kind of in the work group phase, but they are making it so that I think it's like a 6-month training period can be done in lieu of sitting for the bar exam.
And just to clarify here for folks who may be wondering, we are still talking about people who have a legal education and will be lawyers. We are not at this point talking about the proposed, for example, paraprofessional program in Arizona, which I'm happy to address if folks want to. But these are alternatives to going through the bar exam. And if you think about places like California that have very, very high rates of non-passage from lawyers who really would be excellent lawyers, they're just bad test takers. These can be very important programs. Anybody else have thoughts on this? Or on multi-jurisdictional practice? Yeah, Becky.
I have a question, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the idea of these sort of licensure gap coverage programs, but in our profession, we're often going up against sort of a, preconceived notion that public defenders are worse lawyers and they aren't real lawyers and they're only doing this job because they can't get a better job. So I'm not feeling a lot of confidence in a system that would, in my opinion, kind of further that perception. So how has that been overcome in these programs, I guess is my question.
I don't have a great answer for you universally. First of all, let me tell you, I share your anxiety. One of the other hats I wear is I teach professional responsibility. And I talk a lot about why is it that, for example, we allow pro hoc for poor people, but not for rich people. And there are two ways to see it. One is that we're expanding service opportunities, and the other is that we just don't think the quality of their representation matters as much. I will tell you that my experience with this has been mixed where I've seen it. Often in rural areas, if someone is from there, there's more forgiveness and acceptance of somebody who may need to retake, but also because they're already part of the community, they've been there, people have had experiences with them. I think it's a much harder row to hoe for people who come from outside, if that makes sense. Anybody else have experience with this or want to talk about it? I agree with you, Becky. It is a challenging problem to thread that needle. Okay, well then I'm going to move on. Oh, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm in Arizona, and we have a couple of people at that the Arizona apprentice program that you were just talking about.
Yeah, let's
And
talk about
so
it.
it's brand new, and it's so the bar passage rate is supposed to be 270 in Arizona. And so the apprentice, if you get between a 260 and 270, you can come in under some supervision and practice as an attorney. And it's really worked out well for us. We had somebody who was an intern for 2 summers, was just short by a couple of points, wanted to come back. And so that's really been beneficial for us, because what you were talking about, or somebody else was talking about, all of the states around us, you can get a lower score and go to those states. So that's what people have been doing. So I think I mean, it's brand new for us. This is the first person we've had like that. And I think it's going to work out very well. But I do think that that's something that you can do and will work. And hopefully that's going to work for us.
Well, that's great. Thanks for telling us about that. I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint then so we can get through all the material, and then we can talk about the last set of solutions that we want to propose. Once again, my sharing skills are limited. There we go. All right. So let's talk about building practice structures here. 3 main strategies: full-time offices, managed assigned counsel programs, Texas in the house, and increasing practice support. And yes, I know they're max elsewhere, but I had to throw that out for my Texas people. Let's just start with what law school graduates are afraid of in rural practice. They are afraid of instability, that they're going to show up and have a solo practice and they'll be unstable. They won't be able to manage their debt, that they'll be engaged in poor practice. I'm glad they're scared of that. They should be. That they're going to be lonely. And lastly, that their career isn't going to go anywhere. When you build a full-time office, you're offering folks stable work and income, loan forgiveness potentially. Those are the programs we talked about a minute ago. Supervision and training, a sense of community, and growth opportunities. There are a lot of reasons to think that public defender offices help us recruit rural defenders, as opposed to these kind of ad hoc panel opportunities. I'm going to talk about 2 examples quickly: Texas and Mississippi. This is some data from Texas. In 2021, there were 65 counties where no local lawyer, and I'm defining local here as having your business address in the county, accepted adult criminal appointments within that county. It's a fairly hefty number. Texas, by the way, has 254 counties, just in case you're wondering. This is a map that I've grabbed from the Texas Indigent Defense Commission that shows where their public defender offices were in April of 2024. So that's 3 years after that map I showed you. And if you compare them, you'll see that while certainly not all of those offices are in rural areas, so these offices here in Dallas and Fort Worth and Tarrant, but an awful lot of the territory, let me see if I can do this here. An awful lot of the territory you'll see here is covered in these rural areas by regional offices or by individual public defender offices. Mississippi, rural offices are bringing people home. Mississippi opened a rural regional public defender office in October of 2025. They recruited 1 chief and 2 junior lawyers who have been practicing there for a little more than 2 months. And one of our junior lawyers who said, I grew up here, I just needed a chance to come back to my hometown. He had been practicing elsewhere and wanted to come home. This was the first time there was an opportunity for him to do it. Why? Because the region that this office opened in, it's 7 rural counties. The largest is about 20,000 people. There was no public defender office because the scale didn't justify it in a county-based system. But by regionalizing, they were able to create a structure that could accommodate scale and distance and still be a full-time staffed program. Here's a comment from Jessica Cantor out of Texas, who's describing why it was that having a public defender office mattered to her. The idea of managing my own practice from advertising to financials to administrative work, on top of all the legal work, was daunting, and the idea of being alone was overwhelming. A rural public defender office made rural criminal practice possible. Had a supervisor and a mentor, peers, investigators, administrative assistants, social workers, built-in training and mentoring. What else? The managed assigned counsel model. Broadly, these are organizations that have a written agreement with the jurisdiction to provide indigent defense. They're directed by experienced defense counsel, and they use attorney contractors rather than employees. It's rural friendly. It reflects the realities of scale, meaning most of the delivery of services is by private practitioners. The managing attorney can tailor the appointments to skill set and attorney availability. In other words, you've removed appointment from the judicial power to the head of the MAC. They can protect lawyers from deeply politicized appointments. Some of you in your jurisdiction, an appointment is a punishment. In other jurisdictions, an appointment is a reward. When they all have to go through the MAC, that disappears. They provide training and supervision, and they can also supply or facilitate paraprofessional support, investigators, social workers, et cetera. Again, go back to that list of what young law graduates are worried about with rural practice. MACs can offer a lot of it: supervision and training, community, and depending on how the finances of a loan forgiveness program are organized and depending on the size and scope of the MAC, they may have some stability in work and income, and they may be eligible for loan forgiveness. Lastly, I want to talk about improving support services. This is the NAPD recommended support staff ratios. And if you take a minute and look at it and think this through, how many of you in rural offices have these support staff built in for your lawyers? I know finding adequate support for investigation, social work, paralegal services is challenging everywhere. But in rural communities, it adds a special value to dealing with the shortage problem. Why? Look at the Oregon workload data and what folks have analyzed. Analyzing support staff and lawyer hours, using the Oregon workload data. The estimate is that if you adequately provided support staff for public defense providers, you could replace more than 18% of attorney case hours with support staff hours. You could reduce the need for lawyers by more than 180 FTE statewide, and you could save more than $29 million annually. These are pretty powerful reasons for a policymaker and a funder to consider the value add of support staff, which, by the way, also makes the practice itself better. So it's simultaneously reducing shortage by amplifying the amount of lawyer time you have, and quite honestly, giving clients better services by providing experienced, trained professionals with their own area of specialty. So once again, I'm going to stop for discussion. And I apologize for running fast, but we ran long earlier, and I want to make sure we had time to get to everything. And I'm seeing some familiar faces here. Folks, let's talk about this for a second. How many of you have built new offices or have explored building new offices? And Karen, if you're not careful, I'm going to call on you. All right. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Alexa Jane, and then Karen, you're going to be next. No, go ahead.
Well, Alexa and I work together, so I can speak for
Okay.
both of us. So we are in Kansas, and we have built Our newest public defender office is actually a rural office. It's in the sort of southeast corner of the state. It has been interesting in terms of recruiting. There's been some really big successes, and then there's also been some challenges that come along with it. But overall, that little office is like a powerhouse, and it's very cool to see it chugging along.
Can you say a couple of words about recruitment for that office?
Lexi, you want to speak to it?
Sure. Well, one thing that's been really cool with that office, particularly because it's brand new, we were able to get in contact with students who were true believers in public defense and explain to them like how exciting it is to be doing rural practice. That's where the need is, but also being part of our agency and getting to go to this new office, they get to start a whole new culture and really build it from the ground up in the right way. It's the right standard of practice. And for students who care a lot about public defense coming out right away, I think that was a big selling point because they can't get that just in any office. And then the other point was that we were able to give them the opportunity to be on those front lines of rural areas, but they have the support the same as someone would in an urban area would have.
Yep.
And I think that meant a lot to them too. It felt like they had a safety line.
Yeah, and I'll flag here that the other thing that was happening in Kansas at the time is you also had this pressure where there was a Doge commission. I don't remember what it was called, but it was the Kansas version of Doge, and one of the initial plans was to eliminate all positions that had been unfilled for, was it 9 months? And of course, that's a killer for law students because of the way the law school hiring cycle works. And the Kansas defenders did a great job of communicating to the legislature why it was that attorney recruitment is on a different cycle and how important it was to have those new lawyer slots open so that the lawyers could come to places like that rural office and have the opportunity to be recruited in law school because that's essential to making this work. Other folks want to talk about any of these? Yeah, Daniel.
Hey everybody, my name is Dan Elman. I teach at Wayne State Law School, and my colleague Athena across the room and I have been thinking a lot about rolling out holistic defense in rural areas. And one of the things that we've encountered both in the academic scholarship and in practice is that it's really hard to do that for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. Not only do you lack attorneys, you lack social workers, you lack access to all the things that
Right.
holistic defense would demand. So I'm just interested in if anyone out there has found a good way to implement holistic defense in rural areas, because that's something that we're trying to think about.
I don't know if anybody has, and if not, we've had a little discussion about that in our office as well. Anybody here actually done it? Well, so if nobody has, I will offer a few thoughts and then maybe other people have ideas. I assume you're already talking to the folks, for example, at Neighborhood Defenders. I know they've been thinking about this. Rick has, and we've had and he's been thinking about it, I think, initially in the context of Mississippi. I don't think Andre is with us, but Rick and Andre DeGree, who's the state public defender of Mississippi, I know talked about this a little bit. I know, having been in working very closely with the Mississippi Rural Pilot Regional Office, it has been our experience that there are exactly the constraints you're describing. Having said that, their investigator is one exam short of also being a licensed social worker, and they are applying a lot of holistic strategies. When I say holistic here, I'm going to say holistic criminal. I don't mean holistic Bronx defender holistic, by which I mean nobody's providing civil legal services, right? It's strictly holistic in the context of the criminal case, if that makes sense to folks. And I will tell you, and I know it's early days, the office has only been open for a little more than 2 months, but and they only handle felonies. 90% of their clients are out of custody. 90%. And I think that part of that's a result of the fact that they're getting there on day one and making bail arguments in court. But there's no question that some piece of it is working really hard, for example, to get in touch with employers and preserve jobs, to help people find rehab facilities, which are very, very scarce. But I think you point to one of the challenges. If I go back 6-7 years when we were first thinking about the overall rural challenge, the first problem we kind of identified internally was you can't take an urban solution and slap it down in a rural community and expect it to work. For example, you can't, go back to our day one representation. You can't build a bail and arraignment unit in a 7-county rural jurisdiction, that might have court in some places once every 6 weeks. You never know. That's a strategy that has to be scaled differently for rural areas. And so I think you and Athena are on the cusp of the next real important conversations about creating rural solutions that are tailored to rural communities. And I hesitated there because I was going to say rural adaptations. And I think that might be a misnomer. I think we have to be open to the possibility that there's something new and different that rural communities are going to build that's not a scaled down or adapted version of an urban solution, but is its own unique, powerful development. And just as an example, I will point to any one of a number of communities that have outfitted mobile courtrooms out of mobile homes, right? And dealt with FTA problems in communities by driving to where people are rather than asking rural residents to come to them. That wasn't an urban solution adapted to a rural area. That was a rural community coming up with its own solution to a problem. So those are my thoughts for what they are worth, which is probably not all that much. Anybody else? Or
Just
thoughts on?
briefly, so sorry.
Yeah, go. No, go ahead.
Karen Califf. I work with the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission, but I was previously at the Public Defender's Office in Marquette, which is, while Marquette is large for the UP, it's still a very rural area. And
you should translate UP.
Upper Peninsula versus Lower Peninsula. But we, as a regional manager, I've worked with the Marquette office once I left in creating a regional mitigation specialist position, which I think, and I've talked with Dan and Athena about that position a lot, and they've got to meet her. But she was there as an intern during her master's. So there was pulling somebody in, doing that pipeline effort. And then she already had a built-in mentor with the mitigation specialist that provides services for clients of the Public Defender's Office. But her role is to only service the rural counties throughout the Upper Peninsula. Mm-hmm. She travels, gets referrals from all over. It was slow to start. And I think that goes to what you're stating of that you have to be mindful of bringing a solution to a community without getting the buy-in of the community. But after several get-togethers of the attorneys, she's had much bigger successes in them utilizing her to do mitigation work. Plus, she had experience with the Michigan Department of Corrections, so has been valuable in helping clients as they make a transition if they're facing time in prison. And I'm excited about it and want to see it replicated. But I do think that it's going to take time because it works in certain settings. Yeah, I would love to just say, like, I'm just going to throw a mitigation specialist that roams around everywhere. But the benefit of is that she is in an office setting, does have that mentorship and that oversight.
So, all right. Well, thank you. And that's very helpful. And I suspect that we're going to want to hear back from you about it more in another year or two still, when maybe it's more ingrained. I also want to flag, although it's a prosecution model, California for a while had a roving environmental enforcement team. Again, going to rural communities and dealing with, the Superfund sites and such. And they had a similar challenge, which was that their kind of circuit riding team were perceived as outsiders and had a very hard time getting buy-in, in part from also even from local prosecutors who felt they were being replaced or slighted. And so this model you've built of, one person who's dedicated to that community, not replacing the people they have, or not stepping over them, but joining them, I think is a much healthier model. There's also a note in the chat, I don't want to miss this, where Carla Huff, North Carolina, says that they're going to be piloting a rural social work internship program in 2026, both with private assigned counsel, I think that's what PAC is, and PDs. And so thank you for that note. Again, we'll be looking forward to hearing more from you. I'm going to go back to sharing just for a second because I want to give you all a chance, for those of you who aren't connected with us, if I can remember how to do my slideshow thing. Here we go. I just want to put up a link to our newsletter. We try and feature stories in our newsletter, not just about the work we're doing, but the work you're doing. So as you are having successes, as you've got stories to tell, please be in touch. You can subscribe here. You can also email us and let us know what you're doing, how it's working. We're often in a position where we can connect you with other resources or other folks who are trying similar experiments or who might benefit from your wisdom or vice versa. So please do subscribe and be in touch. And with that, I'm going to give you all back your day because we're at 4:12. That'll give everybody just a minute to catch their breaths before what else they have. 3:12 if you're central, and so on and so on. And again, please feel free to reach out to us. We can't cover everything in this webinar, but we would like to make sure we're in touch with you. One last observation, we have a white paper coming out in the spring that will address all of these issues and propose some solutions. So there will be another publication you'll be able to draw on. Thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time.